Welcome, everybody, to the A. Richard Newton Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. We are thrilled to have Alberto with us because Alberto is going to be talking about AI. It turns out the hype is real. As we are thinking about the stages of starting a new venture, Alberto is here to tell us about something that's going to be impacting almost everybody. Recently, he gave me a quote that said that 80% of Fortune 500 companies are using AI in one form or another. So whether you're looking to start your own new venture or starting in a company, it's going to be critical. And Alberto is somebody who I was introduced to by our Professor Emeritus Kurt Koitzer. Not only does Kurt have this incredible background in innovation, he worked at Bell Labs and then he came to UC Berkeley, where he also worked with Richard Newton, who is the namesake. This series is named after him, but he's always on the cutting edge of new innovations. He worked with a company called DeepScale, and Forrest Diandula had actually spoken with us, and that was sold to Tesla. And he told me about, I'd say, 3/4 of a year ago, if there's anybody I should talk to about AI, it's Alberto. So, Alberto, I don't think that you actually know that, have that as background, but I'm thrilled that you're going to talk to us more about AI. Then we get to ask you some questions. And we usually start off with this timeline of our speakers. And I wanted to share it with everybody who's listening. Alberto has studied physics, philosophy, started off at the University of London, and then went to UVA, where he got his PhD, came to Berkeley and was part of the MTI, or Management of Tech Innovation program. Then had this interesting period where he was a research fellow in Taiwan, Kyoto, Kathmandu, and then in the past decade, basically came back to Berkeley. And not only did you work with Dr. Koitzer, but you have done 2 incredible initiatives as founder for the Berkeley AI Research Climate Initiative and also co-founder for the Berkeley Humanities and Social Sciences Association, which has, I think, over 2,000 members, probably more now in a short time. So, Alberto, I've talked plenty. I'm going to kind of stop my share and hoping that you will share a little bit more about yourself. I have a question for you, but I was wondering, how does somebody with that academic background get into AI like you have?
So I jumped a lot around in my career, especially earlier decades, as you mentioned, and I have a slide on that in a second. But I started programming, I taught myself when I was about 12 or 13. So I was always interested in technology. And in the early, maybe 2010, 2011, when machine learning was growing and growing and growing, and it sounded super exciting field. And really the transition was possible thanks to Professor Koitzer, that many on campus know for his mentorship. And so we'll see that again in a minute. But really the pivotal moment was meeting the right people that kindled that interest in machine learning, deep learning, AI, and also in entrepreneurship at Berkeley.
It is maybe no coincidence that you have a bit of an accent. And so there are a lot of students out there who are at Cal the first year that they've been anywhere outside of their own country. I didn't say I was going to ask you this, but I am kind of curious. You were born and raised in Italy, in the Dolomite area. What made you want to come to the States? How did that happen?
So it took me a while. I started off with physics in my hometown, and then I went to London and eventually ended up in Berkeley. But before Berkeley, I spent about 4 years in Asia. So for my previous career, I studied Sanskrit and Tibetan and Japanese and Chinese. Don't quiz me, I've forgotten everything completely. And so I really did move around a lot. I taught at the University of Kathmandu that you mentioned. several months in India, several months in Taiwan, almost 2 years in Hong Kong, almost 2 years in Japan. And I just really like moving around, I guess. And but Berkeley was always of interest to me. And once, after landing the first time and getting over the fog at SFO, and finally seeing the Berkeley Hills, I just fell in love with the area. And the vibrancy and the energy. I'm still a few blocks from the campus. I just love that energy. The opportunities, obviously, but that energy with all the people, all the ideas, and all the products coming out to Berkeley, and all the life-changing research from our pure scientist friends. I just love it.
Ah, that's wonderful. Thank you. It's great to hear you talking about people and the energy, especially since now we're going to focus on artificial intelligence. But you said you were would you be okay with sharing some of the slides that you had that you'd prepared for us today to talk about the hype is real?
Sure. Thank you. And by the way, I wanted to thank you. I was here in 2016 teaching for the Sutaja Center, and we'll see one of the outcomes is fairly well known, Deep Scribe on campus. So thank you, and thanks to Kurt again for having me. Okay, give me a second.
Great. We can see that.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I have just a few slides, and they are pretty empty, as my designer friend would say. But I think we're here to talk more than share, walls of text. We can do that later. I'll offer my email and my LinkedIn connection if anyone has follow-up questions. Okay, so I decided to name it like this because it's since about 2014 that I hear that AI is a hype, and we're still waiting for the hype to kind of deflate. It's just not happening. It hasn't happened yet. It may slow down eventually, but not for a long while. So I wanted to really focus on how quick we can develop new products today thanks to AI, whether they are the self. Whether AI is the whole point, or you're doing something where AI is completely hidden, it doesn't matter. AI allows us to build things faster than ever. But first, yes, so being on and off the campus for about 11 years and teaching consistently for the last 7 years at Berkeley. So I've heard many times students say things like, oh man, I wish I had gotten A instead of A minus, or maybe I should have focused a little more. Maybe I should have taken more coding classes. That's something we hear frequently. So I wanted to share what I went through, how I got here, because there's a space of opportunities out there. And if you if you talk to the right people and you put in the right amount of effort and you're strategic enough, then this space can accommodate very different careers. So essentially, once you see how I spent 15 years doing something else, maybe it's not going to bore you too much if you spent 15 minutes or 15 days doing something that wasn't super 100% focused on what you think will get you to the success that you want to get. So essentially, grew up in Italy, started with physics. Physics is very difficult. It's wonderful and it's difficult. By then, I had already been coding for about 5 or 6 years, which I taught myself from the late 80s, I guess, and transition halfway through my undergrad from physics to essentially ancient Indian philosophy, and moved to London, to the University of London, School of African and Oriental Studies. And basically, I had a career in the humanities for about 14, 15 years, all the while still being interested in technology. And there was a lot of talk about digital humanities back then. And so I was kind of one of the tech guys in the humanities. And then there was this massive jump that you alluded to earlier. how do you go from teaching humanities and studying these ancient Asian languages and reading these texts that were written 2,000 years ago, immediately kind of suddenly jump into one of the top 3 CS programs in the world with a super, super low acceptance rate, right? So what I did right was there was always very proactive, right? Always shaking hands, always trying to find the opportunities, always trying to find common interests. And to do that properly, I actually studied and I actually deliberately worked on my social skills and even emotional intelligence. I don't know how much that worked, but anyway, like literally I was reading books on how to improve my social skills and videos, try to understand a little bit how to relate, how to communicate. For the technical side, I was doing all what's called deep work, which is when you actually concentrate, no distractions, no apps, no nothing. You can do, say, if you can do 15 minutes and then you take a little break. It's like real deep work is, by the way, the name of the book that I recommend on the topic, right? Forget about the world. The next 50 minutes, and if you can't do that, the next half hour, it's all only concentration. And then I did Anki. Anki is the name of an app for basically essentially it's flashcards with a timer, so that it's called spaced repetition, so that you learn things. Like you set a flashcard today, then next week, then next month, then in a year's time. And network. So that's why from the humanities I started connecting with people in CS, and especially Professor Kurt Keutzer, who eventually gave me the opportunity to do for 1 year to work in his lab. So that was really life-changing. But in summary, honestly, if you talk to the right people, if you put in the right effort, if you're strategic enough, there's this ample space to carve out your career. Okay, so
Alberto, Alberto, I have a quick question for you. It's the soft skills, that emotional intelligence, social skills aren't challenging. Is there Are there any rules of thumb or things that you were surprised that you learned that help you, almost like hooks that you can use just to get started when you're meeting, when you're in a group? Let's say you're in a huge group there, you're at a conference. Anything you'd recommend doing?
yeah, sure. So what's called reading the room, which includes trying to understand, body language, for example, was one of the most important things because, and I literally had to. So everyone reads body language, and everyone can see if someone looks clearly angry or clearly happy or clearly relaxed, right? So pretty much almost everyone can see kind of the easy bits. Uh, but then I literally started looking it up, and I started watching videos on YouTube and trying to learn a little more, literally just improving the skill, right? So I'm talking to someone. How do I come across as a little more friendly, or maybe how do you understand if they're getting bored? How do you understand maybe am I speaking too quickly? Am I speaking too slowly? And in this respect, I think one of the most important things that anyone can do is to watch yourself, watch recordings of your own performance. I always tell my students before the final presentations, in terms of bang for the buck, let's say you have a 12-minute presentation. The absolute most important 12 minutes that you can invest is watching that, say, dry run again. So that's the most important. And then you'll notice, for example, I noticed for a period, I was always tilting my head. No one told me, and then I noticed, hey, it looks better if I don't. Same with pauses, or maybe speaking too quickly. You don't want to speak too quickly, right? You want to give people space, and you want to pace things. So yeah, watch yourself, or if you're in a team, watch the team's performance. I think that's would be my number one tip for sure.
Thanks. Thank you for that human intelligence. Appreciate it.
Sure. So I'm going to carry on with I call it position statement. Let me pull up the slides again.
Great.
Okay, if hopefully you can still hear me. So essentially,
Yes.
I'll read it because I wrote this, so might as well read it. So thanks to AI, never in the history of humanity has it been easier and faster to build and scale products that solve actual needs. Okay, so we come off a few revolutions, including the internet going back a few decades, and then mobile. So this is another revolution. And then everything, these three revolutions allowed the speed to concentrate in some parts of the world, like the Bay Area, right? So second paragraph, the Bay Area is both the leading world center for entrepreneurship in terms of investments, in terms of the size of networks, the universities and whatnot, and also in the development of AI. And these two clearly are connected, right? So you see companies like OpenAI, for example, right, in San Francisco, co-founded by including some Berkeley colleagues. And finally, AI is increasing the speed and rate of disruption. If you think ChatGPT is in the news all the time. So as of today, when I'm recording this, it's actually only 10 months ago that ChatGPT came out, and it feels like an eternity before and after. Okay, next. So I like to think about products as some are inevitable, as in they will happen, someone will build them, and some are not inevitable. It helps me think through uh, where I want to invest my time, how risky something is, trying to understand, the connection between team and the ability to deliver. But essentially, some products are bound to appear, and maybe there's a startup working on something today, and I think that it's an inevitable product. I don't know, maybe that startup will deliver, maybe not. But in any case, someone will build that. We'll see examples in a second. And just because someone will build them doesn't mean if you try to build them, you're going to be successful, right? It could be a little too early, it could be a little too late. It could be that you build something for 6 months and then someone else, like one of the big companies, it turns out they were already building that. You get scooped massively. Happened before, okay? So, for example, self-driving cars and AI for medical imaging, they're both inevitable. They will happen. It's happening slowly. And yes, in both cases, I chose these examples because in both cases, we, who should have known better, the AI specialists, since 2016, 2017, we were pretty breathless about both, right? We were promising self-driving cars around the corner. We were promising a revolution in medical imaging around the corner. And as I said, 2016, 2017, even people much more senior and famous than me, we got it pretty wrong, okay? The timing, we got it really wrong, but they're both inevitable, right? So self-driving cars, sure, it's difficult. It's proving difficult, it's proving slow, lots of edge cases. It's really inching forward, but it is inevitable. We will have self-driving cars. It may take 5 years more, 5 years less. We will have them. Same with very highly accurate descriptions of medical imaging by AIs, and I've had several projects here. They're still quite problematic in many fields. They may not perform as well as trained humans, but it will happen, right? I think it's obvious. We keep investing, we keep improving, and it will happen. Something is not inevitable is Twitter, and I know they changed the name, but Twitter. If you go back when Twitter started coming in view, it just didn't sound obvious at all, right? Why would you have something like that? It was 140 characters limit at the time, if I remember correctly. It was not inevitable at all. You can think of a future or a present world where Twitter didn't exist, right? And probably same with TikTok. Another thing that I've seen for about 10 years, lots of enthusiasm at Berkeley, blockchain and crypto. Frankly, I haven't seen really that inevitability, right? I'm still waiting to see, okay, where are the products actually? Yes, there's the exchanges, and there's the people going to jail also, and there's still a lot of hype around blockchain. But really, where are the so-called killer apps, right? So where's the value actually there? So I don't think that blockchain and crypto is inevitable. Okay, so that helps me go through the next three examples that bring us back to begin with to the Sutaja Center in Berkeley of three startups. I believe what they're doing is inevitable, and that's why I'm attracted to products like this. Okay, and first I wanted to say, so what's different now? Why is it that these startups can build and other startups can build products so incredibly quickly and they're so powerful? Um, so essentially, whenever we write software of any complexity, we work with these so-called APIs. And I'll give you a simple example so everyone understands what an API is. So let's say you need to calculate the distance between Berkeley and Tahoe. And you can do it, sure, but why would you do it when with a few lines of code, and it's very simple to do, you can essentially your computer sends a little question, a little request to the Google Maps, their API service. And so instead of you trying to figure out, okay, so that's the road, but it's not a straight line, where are we going, blah, blah, blah. Now, Google will just tell you exactly the way they calculated some distance, right? X miles. So the entirety of software development is reliant on this services, APIs. Sounds good? It's very simple. You just have a little thing that you need and you ask some website to do it for you. It could be calculate this distance, it could be find the price of an airplane ticket, anything like that, okay? Now, with products like ChatGPT and similar, the so-called products around the so-called large language models or foundation models, and we'll see more, we'll see the examples in a second. Essentially, they're the most powerful APIs ever. So they're infinitely more powerful than just asking Google Maps, what's the distance between Berkeley and Tahoe or LA and San Diego? Okay, so that's what's different now. We can think about this. We have these immensely powerful blobs. So Victoria, maybe we'll talk about what's AI essentially. And I don't know if anyone else has described it as a blob. It sounds strange, but you have these immensely powerful blobs. And one is called GPT-4. There's a fourth version of GPT, obviously. And then we kind of shape these blobs through various means to work for some purposes. And these amorphous, like kind of shapeless blobs contain this huge amount of information because they've gone through the entire public internet, for example. They've read everything. And with GPT-4, the input also included images. You have these kind of immense brains that are kind of not very sharp around the edges, so we need to get them into shape to work for our present purposes. But we have the point being we have these completely immensely powerful blobs, and we've only started scratching the surface of what these blobs can actually do. So one thing that they can do, one thing that is easy to predict is we can just work faster. We can just work more productively. So talking to a student the other day, and she said very simply with GPT-4, she's a data scientist, and she said it's like I have a junior data scientist as an assistant. Beautiful, right? So existing work can be more productive. Imagine that, or you're a software developer, you ask certain questions, it's a bit like having an assistant, for example. It's one ways in which it's different now. That never happened before. Naturally, last point on the left, we can also come up with completely new products. They were sci-fi, and we'll see one in a second. They were sci-fi, they were literally just not possible. So today maybe two or three of you can do what 18 months ago I would have needed a dozen fresh PhDs, and 3 years ago no one on earth was able to do, and now some of you can do in a few weeks. And let's see, let's dive right in. So I love DeepScribe because the founders, Akhilesh and Matthew, actually met at the Sutaja Center. The class was called IEOR 185. I think the name is a little different now. Maybe the number is still the same, 185, yes. It was called Challenge Lab, which I taught in, I think that was the fall of 2016, maybe, or thereabouts. So Akhilesh and Matthew actually they're well known on campus. They remained very much connected, and I just love. There's a couple of things under notable that I really want to highlight because it's just a beautiful story. It's just the classic story, right? So the founders were super resourceful. So they could just make things happen with very limited resources. I'm speaking especially at the very beginning, right? They were still undergraduate students, and there was a lot of grit and a lot of resilience. They just kept going. This was not an overnight success. They just kept going, right? They just kept going, and I met them. I kept meeting them, especially the first years, every few months, and they were always very gracious, very smiley, in spite of all the amount of work that they were doing. And that's another thing that was very interesting about DeepScribe. They actually pivoted. So what they were doing in my class is different from what DeepScribe ended up being. And it takes a lot of strength and courage to pivot, right? There's the so-called sunk cost fallacy, where you invest a lot into something. It could be actual money, it could be time, it could be mental energy, and then you say, well, I've invested so much, so I keep going, right? Whereas a pivot is kind of the opposite. It says, okay, I've worked 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years on this. You know what? Let's do something else. It takes a lot of strength and courage, not just for you, but also telling people and moving, not just steering the ship, but like changing ship possibly. And so DeepScribe had this intuition about medical transcriptions, and the principles of entrepreneurship that they learned from Kurt Keutzer, from me, from Steve Blank, and through other resources are still the same today as they were 20 years ago. The idea of product market fit and things like that. So they were really, really, really focused on actually adding that value and solving those pain points. So I would encourage you to go to their website. They also have a very interesting blog, and you can learn a lot more there, what they do and how they do it. But essentially, it's medical transcriptions, very difficult. And
Alberto, you said that they started doing something in your class and then pivoted. Do you mind sharing what they were doing in class?
yeah, so this DeepScribe is a mixture of a few technologies called natural language processing and speech to text, right? So there's a patient and doctor, they are communicating, and so you need to get the text out of the sound, and then you also need to put it into a form that is useful for the clinic, and that's for recording purposes, and extract things like the names of drugs and whatnot, right? It's easy to describe, but it's actually very, very difficult because if you think about it, it's a hyper specialized form of English. There's hundreds of names of drugs, hundreds of names of bones, a mixture of Latin names and ancient archaic names for your tendons and whatnot, right? So it's very difficult. What we started off in class was about patent. So it was on natural language processing, this family, this subfield within AI today. But it was applied to patents. So essentially extracting information from patents. So, and a lot of people have worked on the space on legal tech. It was always very difficult, but certainly 2023 with this ChatGPT and other of these large language models, I think it would be far, 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 far easier than when we started in 2016.
Right? It's interesting.
Yeah, very, and it's it takes some courage. It takes some courage to and some strength to pivot. And a final point, as you can see, I'm quoting Crunchbase. As of today, they've raised 37.2 million with a very substantial Series A. I believe it was last year, possibly the end of 2021. I don't remember exactly. So yeah, so that's the Series A was very substantial in size, and but this is a beautiful Berkeley story, right? So they were a data center, then they took Lean Launchpad out of the business school and the CS at the time, I believe Skydeck, the accelerator, and they were connected to the house fund, and so really all at the beginning it was really a Berkeley thing, right? Then obviously they grow when they hire wherever they can find the best talent. But this is a beautiful example for our students. It's like it's just perfect. They used all the resources, they met all the right people, and they did it, and they're still doing it, and they're still hiring, by the way.
Believe it or not, I think we had some people from Newton who were interns there, the Newton series.
Excellent. Excellent. I really liked Akhilesh and Matt. Whenever we can, we meet for pizza and beer at Jupiter. It's been a while, and also the pandemic was in the way until a couple of years ago. But they're wonderful. I really enjoyed working with them. Okay, so this is by no means ancient, but that was 2016, 2017. The pivot, maybe I don't remember, 2019 or thereabouts. Don't quote me. So I'm going to quote now two more projects quickly, if we have time, a little faster, and we are going to get closer to today. Okay, so Kyber, it's another startup, and I encourage everyone, Kyber.ai, can go and look it up. Really, really cool. And they use another kind of AI technologies. They're called diffusion models. And probably you've seen diffusion models used to create images. And yes, it's one of the startups that has tools that allow you to essentially create videos, hence the reference to Linkin Park there. So essentially, but what they did, okay, so let me backtrack. So I've worked with the CEO on several projects, and he's helped a number of Berkeley startups in a previous reincarnation as a lawyer. And two or three of the founders are from Berkeley. So hence the connection again. And then from IP lawyer, my friend Victor Wang went to founding startups. This is the second one. And they're hiring, by the way. So yes, find them on LinkedIn, find them out there. But there's a few notable things here. So they are pretty recent. I think they started only at the beginning of this year, and the growth was completely astonishing, completely astonishing. And they really figured out what people needed and were willing to use and pay for a few months ago. They really captured that really well. Another noteworthy thing is the self-reliance. So as far as I know, they basically did everything independently. And I don't know how much I can disclose. Maybe ask the founders. I'm not going to go and share or overshare. But the self-reliance is very remarkable, and I think it's a source of inspiration. Maybe one day I'll ask them if they can write a blog post around that. And I want to emphasize here the difference from the previous example and the next example. It's they spent several years in industry, maybe about 10 years in industry, and then they came back for the startup. So I wanted to highlight a different path than just, starting your company while you are an undergraduate. It's totally fine to spend a few years in industry, pick up some skills, increase your network, and then you come back and do a startup. Super common. And so if you see them, essentially, they create tools that allow people to create videos, for example, for music or whenever you want to create a video. But what's interesting is that they didn't try to completely substitute tools that people were already using. The techniques, the technology is not there. right? So what they wanted and what they delivered is to augment these tools so that if you are creative, you use Kyber and then you can use your existing tools to polish things or edit things and things like that. So AI here is central to the product, but it's supplemental to the workflow of the creative. And once you visit their website, you'll recognize the style. You probably notice, oh yeah, I've seen this. So really, really cool. And as I said, I highlighted in part because the path was very, very different, still largely from Berkeley, two of the three of the founders, but the path was quite different from DeepScribe. And I have another example, final example. So this is super fresh, LanguageX. My students over the summer, they only finished the final deliverable in class maybe 2 weeks ago, as of the date that we are recording this. And highlighted because the speed, as I said a few times now, the speed at which it's possible to build pretty polished products today, already knowing what will happen if you need to scale, right? So one thing is you have one user and then 100 users and then 100,000 users, right? And it used to be, sometimes it was extremely painful to scale. Even Twitter earlier on was famous for being down because they had issues, technical issues, right? So from day one, we were able to think about, okay, how do we scale this? Even as we were working, they were working, right? Not me, on the prototype. And I really like the story for a couple of notable things. So they won the Hal Varian Award, which is awarded. It's named after the chief economist Hal Varian at Google. It's very cool. He's a very famous economist. Maybe some of you have used his textbooks in your classes actually. And he was at Berkeley, and then he went to Google. And so anyway, so that's great. It's an important award. Looks great. And what I really liked about this project was that it gives me an opportunity to share. That it was really the kind of the best case scenario of okay, you're at Berkeley, you have a product idea, and you have a technical team. Not the whole team needs to be technical. If you're not technical, there's plenty of things that you can do to add value. But clearly, if it's a software product, at least someone needs to be technical, right? And as I said earlier, by using the ever more powerful APIs, they built this product. It's very simple. This is super simple to think about, but it was sci-fi until recently. So you pick up the phone and you talk to someone and you speak in your language, they hear their language, and vice versa. So, for example, let's say there's a humanitarian crisis and I don't know, the Red Cross or whatever flies doctors to, I don't know, there's a typhoon or an earthquake in Central America, and doctors from here fly there, and the patients may not speak English or not enough, and likewise doctors may not speak enough Spanish. So you can just speak to your phone, and they'll hear Spanish, and you'll hear English back. Obviously, everything is also on text, so you can look at the text also. Similarly, there are a lot of people, there are something like 200 languages spoken in the Bay Area, right? And if you speak, one of several languages that are spoken in the Philippines, for example, right? And you need to go to the doctor, maybe it's an emergency. Well, chances are that doctor or no one at the hospital that day here in the Bay Area will speak that language. Is one of the languages, many languages spoken in the Philippines, right? So you do need to communicate with doctors. And so these are some of the use cases. It sounds simple, right? It's like, oh yeah, yes, it's simple, the idea, because we saw it in sci-fi and in Star Trek and things like that, right? Yeah, sure. I just speak to a little machine and someone hears it in their own language. Super simple to explain, completely impossible until recently. And now, by putting together these pieces, the APIs that I mentioned earlier, and fine-tuning all of things and working always with an eye on performance, how well does it work? They were able to do this in one semester, the demo, right, the MVP. So that's what I love. And during the semester, they also talk to there's a program on campus called Berkeley iCore program. I think it's also spelled BAY for Bay, iCore dot something, easy to find. And so that's a part of Berkeley that will help you work on product market fit. You will need experienced founders who will guide you. And eventually, if you go through a couple of stages, you can also find grants. I believe it's 50 to 60K depending on the year. This is non-dilutive money. It's free money, right? It's literally just a grant. You're not giving up ownership of your company. After that, there's another one called NSF SBIR. That's around $250,000 depending on the year. And all of this is already mapped out at Berkeley, inside Berkeley. All of this has already been taken advantage of by lots and lots of founders. So there's so much at Berkeley for anyone that there are dozens of people out there whose job it is to help you think about product, find team members, find a little budget for marketing, find a little budget for cloud computing and whatnot, right? And they've done it with dozens of companies, and they can do it again with you. Sounds good. And so if anyone is curious, I'm going to have a post on LinkedIn where I'll have links and names and everything, so it's easier to see everything than just putting a bunch of names, a bunch of links on slides. Okay, so just to wrap up, oops, I forgot one line. Never mind. So I think I wanted to say that I kept saying things like faster than ever, easier than ever, and so forth. That's all true, but there are things that remain the same. The product principles, right, largely remain the same. Concepts like product market fit, concepts like pain points, and so forth, pretty much remain the same. So if you've taken startup classes at the Sutaja Center or the Lean Launchpad class or others on campus, those principles still work the same, right? You're still trying to find your niche. You're still trying to find something that adds real value to someone, right? That solves someone's pain points. Like in this case, going to the hospital and the doctor speaks English and possibly another language or two, but they don't speak 200 languages for the entire Bay Area, right? Similarly with Kyber, to improve your creativity and get these ideas, maybe some of them are kind of like, wow, I never thought I could do something like this. And then you take that and you make it your own, and then it's your own style, right? But the point is the product principles, the 20, 30-year-old books from Steve Blank and others, and maybe you heard about startups. The thinking still remains the same, right? And that's great because Berkeley is right there at the top worldwide for entrepreneurship. So you have both the people who can teach you that side, right? The entrepreneurship, the product principles, the lean startup. And we also have some of the best in the world who can teach you all manners of technology, including AI. And here, oops, this just disappeared, yes? Okay, it got back. So everyone's very welcome if you would like to connect on LinkedIn. Otherwise, if you have questions, you can also email me. That's right there, super easy. My family name at berkeley.edu. And I think that's about it for now.
I think it's completely appropriate that you had the blank bullet because you were talking earlier about leaving space, about reading the room, and it just made me think of that. I thought it was a nice metaphor for that. And obviously, I'm into metaphors because one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what's the best description you've heard of AI? Given that you said it was a blob, which is a fine description. But I told you I had an English PhD student say she thought it was a word calculator. How have you ever heard of a good description for what AI is? It seems so all-encompassing.
So more and more, it's just it's getting closer and closer to just the human intelligence. So, and decades ago, actually maybe 70 years ago, there was super famous Alan Turing coming up with the Turing test. And then I feel like a lot of people are moving the goalposts. And then, but look, yeah, talk to ChatGPT for a suitably long period of time. And sure, sometimes they make stuff up, but it's just more and more about undistinguishable from human intelligence. And here's the thing that I noticed I've been doing lately. So people talk about prompt engineering. So you have like these blobs, and you need to talk to them, right? There's all the information in there. They also can have original thoughts, but yeah, that's great. But you need to get that out of there, right? When I talked about Google Maps API, you have some very precise few lines of code. It's just code, and if you type everything correctly, you can ask, okay, what's the difference between Berkeley and Monterey, right? It's very simple. It's a few lines of code, very simple. You just need to type everything correctly or copy and paste. Now, these blobs, these AIs, are kind of similar, but instead of typing things correctly, look, I'm gonna get some flack for this, but you basically have to learn their psychology. And I realize 100% I'm anthropomorphizing them, but the way that, it's so-called prompt engineering. So you prompt them, right? It's sometimes they have kind of a childlike quality where you have to, they'll say something and say, okay, that wasn't quite correct, try again, and they'll improve over themselves. So it sounds wild, and I would never have said this even a year ago, but literally we have to learn something that is quite akin to learning these models psychology. If they were humans, I would say psychologists, like, hey, there's this super smart person. How do you get them to actually tell you the truth? How do you get them to do what you want them to do instead of going off a tangent, or being too vague or not being vague enough? And so, yeah, it's more and more the artificial bit. Yeah, sure, it's artificial, but more and more it feels kind of, yeah, it's intelligence. I mean, we can call it artificial forever, but this is intelligence. I know a lot of people disagree and says, oh, it's just a little bit of math and whatnot, done very quickly. Sure, but I queried ChatGPT in 5 or 6 Italian dialects the other day. So I was asking other things, like explain to me this bit of physics or this bit of code or whatnot. But every time I was curious to see, just probing what it could do. And I say, okay, use a dialect from Tuscany, use the dialect, the Venetian dialect, use the Sicilian dialect. It's just astonishing. You find me a person who can explain to you recipes as well as physics, as well as geology, in any number, in a few numbers of Italian dialects. Just because I did it, just because, right? We need to probe these models, these blobs, and understand what's actually in there. And finally, there's another thing that is really astonishing, is that we just don't know. We just don't know what they can do. And I'm going to give you one example that we, again, from the summer, so it's very fresh, just finished a few weeks ago. One of my students had the intuition of trying to see if ChatGPT and GPT-4 understood the building codes. These are very specific technical things that are outputted in a very specific file format. This is not left. So when you talk to an architect, the architect will have to put things in a very specific format that then goes to town hall, and town hall will say yes, no. And it turns out that GPT-4 actually is it's a pretty good architect at doing that. We could say things like, okay, can you put a window in here? And then we can say, okay, why did you want the wall around the window that thick? And ChatGPT will explain, well, because it needs to be fireproof for at least 30 minutes in California. So it's completely astonishing and unprecedented. I'm still kind of shocked that ChatGPT just learned the building codes. Yes, it makes mistakes. Yes, we need to learn how to probe it. So the super exciting thing is no one knows all these abilities. Okay, ChatGPT is a pretty great interface between me and an architect or the architect at City Hall. What else is in there?
Mm.
Right? And it only came out 10 months ago. What else is in there? What other skills are there that no one has probed yet?
Sounds like it's an alternative intelligence as maybe versus maybe an artificial intelligence. Is there anything that people are worried about AI? What worries you about AI?
So even with previous technologies, that there tended to be an accumulation of power and influence. Essentially, the web and the mobile and now AI tend to accumulate power and wealth and influence into companies ever faster. So that, sure, there are a lot of startups, right? But most of the startups get acquired, or OpenAI in a way was a startup until recently, but that was different, right? So it's a startup that starts off with people like Elon Musk as investors. So it's not your average startup. So yeah, that accumulation. And for example, so if you're a European, I'm just saying European because I'm a European. But if you're a European the person, how happy are you that there's say on the board of OpenAI, there's someone who was at the CIA for, I believe, 8 to 10 years, right? It's look from the point of view of the U.S. government and the U.S. Competitiveness and whatnot. I think it makes perfect sense, right? These are immensely powerful technology, so why shouldn't there be someone who had a career at the CIA on the board of OpenAI? I think I mean, it's perfectly natural for the US government to do that. But on the other hand, if you're anywhere else on the planet, there's this accumulation of power and influence and wealth in a few tech companies. Um, is that really healthy? Like, it's healthy today, but this is also the beginning of numerous sci-fi novels, right?
Mm.
That weren't always super okay. So yes, is that accumulation, even as I'm in the Bay Area, and the accumulation is first and foremost here with other very important centers. But yeah, is that going to be okay when we have three all-powerful entities?
You happen to mention Europe. It seems like they are at the forefront of trying to put guidelines or regulations in place. Is there anything that you think that one could be doing more in the US that emulates Europe?
So I think in Europe, from what I know, so the kind of the spirit is, or some of the ideas are kind of good, and as often the implementations may be a little questionable here and there. Remember, this is super quickly moving technologies, and I've already told you multiple times how astonished I am by the the speed of change, which is accelerating. So how is it possible that these committees that need to put together dozens of countries are going to be able to react uh, fast enough and stay on topic and on the ball, right? So I appreciate the spirit of some of the efforts, and I don't know. I'll have to see the implementation essentially. Having
How?
said that,
Yeah.
so what about the US then? Um, I think definitely I'd like to see more emphasis on privacy. So these models are so immensely powerful at memorizing things. So let me give you an example. I use one of these models on your history of emails. If you go through my history of emails, I've at 4 or 5 universities, they were all Google on the back end, same as Berkeley, right? Also, one of my private emails is Google. So you could train one of these models, and they will essentially almost memorize 10, 20 years of your emails. Not only that, you'll be able to ask questions. How did Victoria feel in 2018? And it will spit out, accurate or not, say a psychological profile in any kind of depth, accurate or not, right? And it will remember all the dates that you put dates for whatever, you exchange things. Oh, there's a dinner party or whatever. It will remember everything. It will know everything. It will be able to query everything in natural language. Instead of having to inspect 20 years of your emails, I will be able to say, so, build up a psychological profile of Victoria over the last 10 years, or anyone else. It could be a job applicant. It could be for insurance companies. So the things that have happened with and around privacy, that's nothing compared to what could happen in the future, where we have these models make mistakes, yes, but they will know us better than we know ourselves. They will know us better than any family member or colleague will know ourselves. And the
Wow.
technology is there today to do this, right?
It's pretty stunning. On the one hand, it makes me feel comforted for people who are going into dementia. Maybe this would be very helpful for them. And for me personally, I would love it if I could be like, how many times have I reached out to Alberto? Like just without having to look it up. How can students keep abreast? I mean, things are going so incredibly fast. What do you recommend for students to courses or things to read to keep that up to date?
So these technologies, there were always a little bit of a split, but even more so, there's now a massive split. So if you want to be some of the people who build this, like the underlying technologies, not the people who use the APIs. So going back to Google Maps, if you want, the people who figure out the math, calculating the distance, and figure out the servers so that billions of people can ask. And then there's the people, could be a web developer who uses the product, right?
Mhm.
The same with AI. If you want to be some of the people who actually contribute novel things to OpenAI or Bing Chat uses the AI, same from OpenAI or Google or whatnot. That's a huge amount of investment, but lots and lots of people at Berkeley doing it. Lots end up with a PhD. So that's one path. It's kind of semi-standard for 9 people out of 10, and just take tons of technical classes in CS, typically out of the CS department. That's very much an open path. Lots of people take it. If you want to just have an intuition, there's a bunch of people who have wrote amazing tutorials. If you're semi-technical and you want to be a user, say a consumer of these APIs, so you want to do a little bit of coding, not too complicated, and be able to, say, put together some of the pieces, the Lego blocks, right?
Mhm.
Um, then you can take a couple of programming classes, maybe Python certainly, and then watch videos on YouTube. Say one of the co-founders of OpenAI, who then was director of AI at Tesla. His name is Andrej Karpathy. Anyway, if people Google Andrej Karpathy, and it's super easy to find. It's very
Andre
prominent.
Karpathy, great, thank you.
That's right. And so he has very intuitive the videos and blog posts. And then there's the third path is like, no, my intuition and my value and my interests are elsewhere. I don't want to be that person, but I still want to keep up. I would say that one of the most important things is just to
Mm.
play with this model, even the simple one where you can just ask things. And that means it's called prompt engineering, and don't be discouraged. I notice some people, even very technical people, they will ask ChatGPT something and it doesn't work. And then, gotcha, doesn't work, told you, another 5 years. Meanwhile, it's like, no, if you just invested another 5 minutes in this, learning the psychology of the blob, then you would have seen, for example, if it turns out that when it lies to you, when it makes stuff up, if you say, are you quite sure? Often it catches its own mistakes. But if you just give up and say, gotcha, you see, all hallucinations.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes, but you just ask back. So just spend time with it, whatever it is you do. Um, I use it, for example, one of the ways to learn how to use it that is also very useful in itself is before I do Google searches. So to
Mm.
narrow down the search, then instead of getting countless results of doubtful quality and having to go through pages of results, it allows me to really focus on much higher quality searches. And then you can find, maybe you can find a paper from the Mayo Clinic that is high quality and reliable. You can find an article from a source, instead of going through a lot of garbage that is now on the internet, all the SEO, right? The optimized for clicks and whatnot. And but that way also, it's not just good for productivity, but at least you start learning how the stuff works, right? So
Yeah.
just start somewhere, just start playing with the blob.
As we're playing with the blob, and I actually really like that idea, um, I can't help but think that even if government is not going to help with privacy, it's probably important that we self-regulate a little bit. And in middle school, as we were talking to students, it was always like, think about before you post something, would you want your grandmother to see this? And I'm wondering if there's anything like that that we can think of as we're thinking of ideas and what to do with AI, and as we start to play around with it, anything to keep us from going over some line.
So if people are that are like fairly cautious, focus on, say, end-to-end encrypted communication, for example, so that the company, including WhatsApp, if you enable it, or Signal or whatnot.
Uh,
So there are several that they're end-to-end encrypted. There are others like OpenAI that if you disable chat history, for example, they claim, and I guess it's a legal claim, trust it as much as you want, that they will not train on your communication. So be a little selective, right? So there are so many companies out there that there's so many situations where you have a little bit of a choice. If I'm making a choice for a child in the family, or someone elderly in the family, I'll try to say, well, let's do something that is a little more secure, because you never know in 5, 10, 20 years where that is going to end up, right? So definitely a little bit of education, self-education, and a little bit of encryption, end-to-end encryption. They can go a long way. And then just keep the conversation alive. I don't like it when people say, "Oh, it's too late." No, it's not.
yeah.
It really isn't, right? And it's like it's never too late, and things can always improve or get worse. So no, just keep talking about it. Same with biases, same with fairness. If people stop talking about it, it's like, okay, we're done. No, we're not. The world changes. Even if we were really done today and we're not, the world changes. So yeah, we need to keep talking about it.
We're kind of coming to the close of our time, and I keep thinking, in 6 months, I'd like to do a chat GPT, or it'd probably be like 5, 6, 7. I don't even know what level it would be, but a query on what are the top AI predictions for the next 6 months. Um, so I'm wondering, what are your top AI predictions for the next 6 months?
Surprises, which is a cop out. I know. It's it's just astonishing. So yes, we could see a fair amount of disruption. For example, like in terms of industry, uh, Google was caught a little flat-footed. I don't know if you even know that they have something that looks like ChatGPT, except if you look close enough, it doesn't look anywhere. Anyway, just doesn't work very well. I know they're working on it, and sorry, friends and colleagues at Google, but um, so we will see. So, for example, is search really going away? I mean, that will be a very massive disruption in the world of tech. If people just stop behaving like the idea, let me Google that, right? And there are a few other search engines like Bing and Yandex in Russia and whatnot. So that would be a major disruption. However, I think it really surprises. Just as I was shocked that ChatGPT-4 through ChatGPT could pass every now and then for an architect, without much effort. Now we're continuing with the project. We're putting in a lot more effort to make it work, 99% of the time. But I expect a lot of surprises. And I expect the barriers to entry both higher and lower. Higher in the sense that, oh, you want to be the next OpenAI? Oh dear. Okay, so well, start off, find $1 billion for your to train these models, and then we'll talk. But also, if someone with just a laptop and a free account with just ChatGPT can probe the blob and figure out these legal blocks and do something really cool, then in that sense, the barriers to entry are lower and lower and lower. So I expect to be surprised.
It has been a pleasure speaking with you. I think that the examples that you provided were super, super helpful. The tips for navigating, not just navigating AI, but actually navigating life, and then your truths for this alternative intelligence or blob. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would like to, words of wisdom you'd like to leave the group with as we end.
Well, I'm not sure about wisdom, but it's always nice to be back. That's why I think that's why not just me, everyone's always happy to be back or to visit. Thank you for your effort, not just you, but the whole center. And as I said earlier, if anyone wants to connect, I'll share again. I'll share on LinkedIn with additional details so you can see you have links to click and names to connect with if you want. And if anyone wants to apply to work for any of those companies, so I'll follow up on LinkedIn also.
You are a master connector.
Thank you.
Alberto Todeschini, thank you so much. Go Bears, Wahoo Wah, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.